said that Michelle Obama was a man before she died.
Was that a joke? I thought it was a joke.
I thought it was a joke too, but the way she said it wasn't like jokey. She was like, oh, come on, everybody knows Michelle Obama's a man. Like, remember that?
Yeah, like, would Big Mike kill you for that?
Well, I think she died because she had 1,000. Michelle Obama.
Joe Rogan and Patrick Bet-David did not hold back. What started as a normal conversation between two sharp minds quickly turned into a complete breakdown of Michelle Obama's carefully polished public image. The energy in the room shifted the moment her name came up. No yelling, no Dramagist.com, clear. Unfiltered thoughts that pulled back every layer of branding and exposed something far more hollow underneath. They didn't need to raise their voices because every word they said landed with quiet force. One by one, they peeled away the myth, the slogans, the well-designed speeches. And what was left wasn't impressive, it was empty. Patrick began by asking a question that seemed harmless at first. What exactly did Michelle do? It sounded like a soft opener, but everyone could tell it wasn't. It was a setup. Joe smiled in that way he does when he knows something explosive is coming. He leaned back and watched as Patrick picked apart Michelle's legacy, not with hate, but with a cool curiosity that made it sting even more. He listed the speeches, the appearances, the media deals, and asked what real change did any of that bring. Sure, she had a garden and told kids to eat healthy. But where was the substance? Where were the policies? What difference did she make beyond being liked? Joe then stepped in and added his own slice of truth. He pointed out how Michelle always positioned herself above politics, smiling while tossing out political jabs in perfectly timed speeches. That tactic only works for so long. Sooner or later, people start asking questions. And when those questions finally came, she didn't have the answers. Joe reminded everyone that being First Lady isn't just about style, it's about action. And when you look closely, there wasn't much action to be found. Patrick then brought up something even more telling, the media presence. He pulled up her YouTube videos, carpool karaoke, appearances on Ellen, interviews full of fun and laughter. The pattern was clear. Everything was entertainment. Michelle was having fun. She was smiling. She was relatable. But when it came to real hard-hitting discussions about policy or results, she vanished. The legacy she had built was based on media moments, not measurable change. People loved her because she made them feel good. But politics isn't about feelings, it's about results. Joe continued, bringing attention to her Netflix deal. He questioned how someone who claims to care about everyday people signs a $100 million deal to make documentaries that barely mention the real issues. He didn't need to be aggressive, he just laid it out. How does a champion of the people become so deeply tied to the same elite class she claims to challenge? How does someone who talks about unity and fairness walk away from public life to cash in on branding opportunities? Patrick nodded and delivered another blow, this time to the core of Michelle's public message. He pointed out how she's often praised for empowering women and minorities, yet when you look past the headlines, there's very little to show for it. No major reforms, no concrete programs that led to real changes. Just well-delivered speeches, TV appearances, and best-selling books. He said it felt more like a lifestyle brand than a political figure. Michelle Obama became a symbol, not a leader. Then came the brutal honesty from Joe. He laughed and asked why people treat her like royalty. He said, it's almost like we're afraid to ask questions. Like Michelle Obama has become too sacred to criticize. But Joe wasn't buying it. She joked about how her most famous line, "When they go low, we go high," didn't really match reality. When critics attacked the Obamas, they didn't always rise above. They bought another house, they signed another deal. They talked about sacrifice while living in mansions. The conversation kept building. Patrick pointed out that Michelle once said the White House felt like a prison with private chefs, security, and luxury. He asked how someone could say that while ordinary people struggle to survive. The comparison wasn't just off, it was insulting. Joe agreed, adding that real leadership means understanding sacrifice, not just talking about it. And Michelle, despite her words, didn't show much of that understanding. Patrick then went in deeper, analyzing Michelle's podcast and the topics she covers. He questioned how someone with such a huge platform used it mainly for feel-good stories instead of real conversations about the issues. He said it felt like a missed opportunity. She had the world's attention, and instead of challenging the system, she played it safe. Joe nodded again, saying it's like watching someone with a microphone choose to whisper instead of speak. The most powerful part came when they both addressed the idea of her running for president. Joe said if Michelle ran, it wouldn't be a campaign, it would be a brand tour. Hope 2.0. Same colors, same font, just more polished. He said people wouldn't vote for her based on policy, but on personality. Patrick agreed and said the media would lose its mind. There would be non-stop praise, coverage, celebrities, and feel-good quotes. But behind the curtain, what would really be different? Joe compared her to a motivational poster. Nice to look at, but not built to lead. He said she's inspiring. Yes, but so is caffeine. That doesn't mean you let it run the country. Patrick laughed and added that her entire presence feels like a Pinterest board in human form. Carefully arranged, nicely lit, but lacking any real depth. It's all about appearance. And in politics, that's dangerous. They both agreed on one thing. Michelle has charisma. She can speak. She can move a crowd. But they asked the hard question, where does that charisma take us? Does it lead to real change or just another round of applause? And when they looked at the record, the answer was clear. It doesn't lead anywhere new. It leads to more of the same. Patrick ended with a quiet truth. He said Michelle Obama's biggest political move wasn't in the White House, it was convincing people she was above politics. Even while playing the game, he said that's the real trick. She sold herself as different while being exactly the same as the rest. And that's what Joe called the great illusion. She's not a villain. She's not evil, but she's not untouchable either. And when you pull back the curtain, you see a brand built on smiles, stories, and well-timed pause is not real action. They didn't scream, they didn't insult. They just talked, calmly, honestly. And by the end, the myth of Michelle Obama wasn't destroyed with Radget, was dissolved with facts. They exposed the story behind the story. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Michelle Obama, the symbol of hope, turned out to be just another chapter in the book of American political illusions. A story told beautifully, but lacking in truth. Let's continue the script from where we left off as the discussion went. On the atmosphere didn't get hostile, it became clearer. Joe and Patrick weren't mocking Michelle for the sake of humor. They were making a larger point about modern politics. In their view, the way Michelle was treated by the media and the public had little to do with her actual actions and more to do with how she was packaged. Joe explained it in simple words. Politics today isn't about leadership. It's about who can sell the best story. And Michelle, he said, sold hers better than anyone. Patrick followed up by pointing out how Michelle's popularity was shaped not by her work, but by her ability to stay above the mess while still throwing punches. She was the master of emotional timing. Her speeches came when the country needed comfort, and she knew how to deliver them in a way that felt personal. But that personal touch, Patrick argued, was carefully crafted. It wasn't spontaneous. It was designed to protect her from criticism, to make her feel untouchable. And that's why, when Joe and Patrick began asking questions, so many people reacted as if they had committed a crime. Okay. Because questioning Michelle wasn't just questioning a person, it was questioning a symbol. Joe leaned forward, serious. Now, and said something that struck deep. We've reached a point where symbols matter more than truth. And that's dangerous. He explained that people latch onto figures like Michelle because they want to believe in something good. I want hope? But when the person representing that hope turns out to be part of the same system they pretend to rise above, it becomes a betrayal. Not a small one, a deep one. 'Cause people didn't just vote for her husband. They believed in them. And when belief is broken, people either get angry or go silent. Most just stay silent. Patrick brought it back to something practical. He said, look at her record. No big legislative moves. No controversial stances. Nothing that risked anything. Her whole time in the spotlight has been about staying safe. He compared it to running on a treadmill, lots of movement, but no forward progress. And that's when Joe jumped in again, now a little more fired up. He said, it's not just about what she did. It's about what she didn't do. She had the stage. She had the platform. And instead of using it to change things, she used it to build a brand. Patrick then mentioned the houses. Not to be petty, but to show the disconnect. He said that people are struggling every day, living paycheck to paycheck. While Michelle and Barack are moving from one multi-million-dollar mansion to another. And yet, when Michelle speaks, she still uses the language of struggle. I know what it's like, she says, but do you? That was the question. Do you really know? Or do you just remember what it was like before the fame, before the money, before the power? Joe nodded and added that it's okay for people to become successful. There's nothing wrong with making money or living well, but don't pretend to still be part of the struggle when you're not. Don't act like you're one of the people when you haven't waited in a grocery line or worried about rent in decades. That's the part that feels fake. And people can feel it, even if they don't say it out loud. Then Patrick dropped one of the most cutting observations of the night. He said Michelle Obama has become the perfect example of performative leadership that looks good, sounds good, but does nothing. He said people confuse her grace with strength, her kindness with action, and her presence with progress. But those aren't the same thing. If you can be graceful and do nothing, you can be kind and change nothing. And that, he said, is the real issue. They talked about the media next, how the press treats Michelle like she's beyond question. Laughed and said they act like she's royalty. And in a way, she is. Not because she earned that status through policy or reform, but because the media decided she was too powerful to be criticized. Any challenge to her words is seen as hateful. Any honest question becomes an attack. And so she goes on untouchable. Above it all, while the real problems continue to grow. Patrick pointed out the shift in politics. He said the new generation of leaders doesn't lead, they perform. They create content. They give interviews. They make videos. But they don't pass laws. They don't fix anything. Michelle, in his eyes, was one of the first to turn political influence into a product. Books, podcasts, documentaries all sold as hope, but delivering little more than branding. Then Joe made it personal. He said he doesn't dislike Michelle. In fact, he thinks she's smart. But that's exactly why this conversation matters. Because smart people who don't speak the full truth can do more damage than loud fools. He said Michelle knows what she's doing. She knows how to move a room, how to avoid tough questions, how to protect her image. And yet, with all that power, she chose safety. And in choosing safety, she missed her chance to make a real difference. Patrick leaned back and said, it's not about hate. It's about honesty. He explained that we live in a time when being honest gets you labeled a villain. But someone has to say it. Someone has to ask, what did Michelle actually do? Not what did she say? Not how did she make us feel? What did she do? Joe brought up the comparison with other first ladies. He said that even those who were criticized for being less polished still pushed for real initiatives. They didn't always succeed, but they tried. With Michelle, it always felt like the priority was image. Looking good, sounding right, staying popular. The last part of the conversation turned serious again. Patrick said the reason this matters so much is because people are tired. They're tired of being lied to. Tired of being sold dreams that don't come true. Tired of watching leaders get rich while they stay stuck. And when someone like Michelle, who once stood for hope, turns out to be just another player in the game, it hurts. Joe agreed. He said the most powerful thing you can do as a leader is be real. Not perfect, not polished, just real. And Michelle, for all her gifts, never let people see who she really is. She gave them a version that sold. A version that was loved, but not the truth. And that's where they left it. Not with anger, not with jokes, but with a quiet truth that echoed long after the conversation ended. Charisma is not character. Branding is not leadership, and symbols are not solutions. And until we stop confusing the three, we're going to keep getting fooled.